is the big deal about open baffle speakers, and why are audiophiles so crazy about them? Well, let's find out as we review our first open baffle loudspeaker on this channel in the Zen Master Series speaker from Decware. The Decware Zen Master Series is an open baffle loudspeaker built around a pair of 15-inch full-range drivers from Lee Audio. Since the speaker has no additional drivers, as you might expect, there is no need for things like a crossover, meaning you are connecting the speaker's voice coil directly to your amplifier. Now, Decware doesn't really give a full breakdown of their speaker's specs, but jumping over to the Lee Audio website reveals that the F15 driver used here has a frequency response that appears pretty linear from between about 50 Hz to nearly 20 kHz. Obviously, the driver can play below 50 Hz in the bass department, but it does start to roll off pretty fast around the 50 Hz mark, meaning you bass heads may need to budget for a sub or two for true full-range playback. Now, Decware claims that the Zen Master Series speaker is 100 dB sensitive, and that is 100 dB at 1 watt and 1 meter, meaning you can achieve concert-like volumes with only a handful of watts on tap. The Zen Master Series is available in a variety of solid hardwoods. Now you're seeing the maple option here, and depending on your choice of hardwood and finish, the final price is going to vary, but all feature the same 15-inch driver. The large front baffle does have an effect on sound and the sound stage, so the size and shape of the speaker isn't an accident. And the same is true for the large plinth that kind of juts out from behind the speaker. While the plinth does aid in stability, it also reinforces bass while giving the driver a reflection point to aid in the speaker's overall soundstage capability. The maple crossbar that you're seeing in this review is not standard, though I do not consider it to be optional, as I found the speakers sound markedly better with some upward tilt. And on some level, Steve Deckert agrees, which is why he has constructed these risers which lift the front of the speaker to an ideal height. Do you have to use them? No. But if you're thinking about purchasing a pair of Zen Masters for yourself, I'd request the crossbar so you have that flexibility. As you might expect, setup and placement of the Zen Master Series is going to be pretty important, arguably more important than maybe a traditional box loudspeaker. In our room, the Zen speakers needed to be pulled out into the room about 30 inches out from our front wall, and that's measuring from the back of the speaker driver to the wall itself. This helped even out the speaker's sound. Too close to the wall and the back reflections could muddy bass and blur the soundstage, making them sound vague and, well, uninspiring. Pulling them out did diminish bass to a degree, but it sharpened up the rest of the speaker's focus, not to mention, resulted in a rather holographic soundstage. Towing in the speakers so that the center of the drivers pointed directly at my listening position gave the most detailed presentation with respect to treble and upper mid-range. Once I settled on placement, driving the speakers themselves was cake, while we tried the Zen speakers on a variety of amplifiers, ranging from our Beolab amps to the brand new NAD C700. I preferred my 2 watt per channel Decware Zen amp, and it is with this amp that I did the majority of my listening. Sources included our Sony X95J into a Shit Modi 3 DAC, as well as the brand new Project Debut Pro turntable connected to the Pluto Phono preamp from U-Turn Audio. So what do they sound like? Well, to illustrate what the Zens sound like, let's do a little sound demo. All right, not that kind of sound demo. If you or someone in your home can sing, have them belt out a couple of bars. If you're not a singer, talk out loud for a minute and really listen to the sound of your voice in your space. I want you to note the presence, the immediacy, the naturalness, the lack of color, the lack of, frankly, anything remotely hi-fi. Now imagine that sound, that transparency coming from your loudspeaker. The tone and sound of what you're hearing in a nutshell is what a properly set up pair of Zen Master Series speakers can sound like. With the right source material, they can sound like almost nothing at all. But let's break it down. In terms of bass, the Zen speakers aren't going to walk away with the W. Like I said earlier, the drivers roll off pretty substantially around 50 Hz, which isn't exactly subwoofer territory. But with a little room or boundary compensation, it is possible to use these speakers without a sub and still come away feeling satisfied with their low-end prowess. I paired them with one of our SVS 3000 micro subwoofers for a bit, but I ultimately preferred the Zen's Au Naturel because even with the sub properly dialed in, and that's including custom PEQ curves applied, it never felt as fast as the Zen speakers on their own. And I was okay giving up some depth in order to maintain the speaker's fantastic bass reflexes because on their own, drum kits sound more like actual drum kits than maybe any other loudspeaker we've heard this year. Albums like Abe Round's The Confidence to Make Mistakes sounded real. I mean, in the room real. The bass out of the Zen is fast, textural, and detailed to the nines. If you can live without bowel-busting extension, the Zen has some of the most realistic and organic sounding bass you're going to find in all of hi-fi. Mid-range is where the Zen really shines. You cannot begin to appreciate just how uncolored this speaker's mid-range is until you directly compare it to anything with a cabinet. In direct comparison to our Heresy 4s, the Zen sounds positively sublime. What's more, the Zen has even greater sensitivity, so the immediacy one gets from a high sensitivity loudspeaker like the Heresy is present, only with zero horn or megaphone-like effects as you listen at higher volumes. So while the Zen is similar in price, its purity with respect to mid-range clarity is on par with that of La Scala, only it's far more linear, resulting in a less peaky performance as you cross over into the high frequencies. So you have a neutral and naturally detailed mid-range that is crazy lifelike without any chestiness or boxy colorations. If you are at all a fan of acoustic music, classical, ensemble jazz, or singer-songwriters, the Zen may rank among the best you're likely ever to hear, regardless of price. As for the highs, the Zen is surprisingly solid, but not the most extended. The reason for this is obvious. The speaker lacks a tweeter. So the coherence as you move from the bass on up through the mids and into the highs is seamless. But because there isn't a dedicated driver for the high notes, they're not as accentuated. Instead, they sit right in line with the rest of the response. So if you lack some high frequency hearing, you may think the Zen is a bit more rolled off or soft up top. I don't mind this because the speaker was never shouty or fatiguing and sounded great with all types of music as a result. But if you rely on a bit of high frequency edge to shed light on detail in those upper registers, this may not be the ideal speaker for you. Now, tilting the drivers up and towing them in toward your listening position will help wring more energy from the driver up top, but on the whole, the highs are textural and airy, just not the most extended. With respect to SOUNDSTAGE, the Zens are nearly holographic with impressive detailed delineation and separation. I firmly believe that in some rooms it is possible for the Zen to completely disappear, but in our room, the SOUNDSTAGE was broad in its scope, both in terms of width and depth, though if I turned my head or sat off axis, sound would gather off to whichever side I was focused. Positioning the speakers straight forward lessened this effect, however, it diminished center focus and treble articulation, resulting in a softer, more mid-range centric sound. Again, placement with these speakers is crucial and ultimately will come down to what sound you prefer. In our room, the SOUNDSTAGE was very dimensional with terrific center focus and awesome depth with great separation between instruments, but I could always locate the speakers themselves, and there was definitely a sweet spot with respect to getting the most out of these speakers. Dynamically, the Zens are every bit La Scala's equal. While the La Scala may have scale on its side, when it comes to dynamics and listening at everyday volumes, these two speakers are actually neck and neck. Unlike the Klipsch, the dynamics of the Zen, like the rest of its sound, are not colored by cabinet resonances, port noise, or anything. Clap your hands softly. Now clap them as hard as you can. That difference in sound is a good example of the Zen's dynamics. There's never a sense of ramping up or a thirst for power in order to get there. The change in impact is immediate. It's hard to fault the Zen speaker. How does one argue with a speaker that is essentially neutral, supremely efficient, with absolutely nothing in the path between your amplifier and the sound itself? The Zen's faults lie not in its sound, but in its uniqueness and need for proper setup, which in some rooms, including ours, may keep the speaker from reaching its absolute maximum potential. This is a speaker that you have to experiment with and be willing to tweak this thing inch by inch till you get the best sound. When you get it right, it's magic, but this is just not a speaker you're going to just set and forget. Patience is key. Also, if you don't have the real estate to let this speaker breathe, and it needs to breathe, it's not going to work for you. Lastly, those who really like bass know that you will need to add a subwoofer to these speakers in order to hit the notes below 40 Hz with any real authority. And if you do it with care, or you will quickly spoil the amazing coherence and speed of the Zen. In terms of comparison, the Zen most directly compares to speakers like the Heresy 4, Forte 4, and even the mighty La Scala. So I'm going to keep this really simple. In my opinion, and in our room, the Zen is a far more neutral loudspeaker compared to all three Klipsch options. It is outright better than the Heresy 4, though I prefer the look of the Klipsch to that of the Zen. The Zen is better than the Forte from the mid-range on up, but the Forte trounces the Zen with respect to bass. However, both the Forte and the Zen have similar setup concerns as it relates to needing physical space around them in order for them to sound their best. The Zen sounds the most like the La Scala to me, only it doesn't have any of the horn-like effects that become more notable from the La Scala as you turn up the volume, something the Zen just never exhibited. I still think the La Scala is the better looking speaker and better for overall scale, but if you routinely listen between, say, 60 and 80 dB, the Zen may be the mini La Scala you've been looking for. As for how the Zen compares to other open baffle loudspeakers like those from Spatial, I have no idea. I have not heard the Spatial speakers, so I don't want to speak to how they might compare. Now, compared to speakers like Magnepan, which are open baffle speakers too, the Zen is far more transparent, way easier to drive, and way more dynamic. Nothing against Magnepan, they're great when done right, but getting it right involves so much more than just placement. Maggies require major investments elsewhere in your system, whereas the Zens really don't. So how does one sum up the Zen Master Series speaker? I suppose one could make a case that as far as speakers go, they're essentially perfect. I mean, they have no real sound of their own, no unique or purposeful coloration due to their construction. They're shockingly neutral, coherent, dynamic, and as easy as a sneeze to drive to absolute perfection. I get that they lack real bass, and for some may come off as a tad rolled off up top, but if you can give them the space they need to breathe and feed them material that speaks to their strengths, I don't know if it gets better. You can definitely achieve something different with other speakers, but better? That's so going to be a matter of personal taste. Me, I just don't know. But I do know one thing. I absolutely love them. So that's it. That is now my review of the Zen Master Series speaker from Decware. Now it's time to find out what Kristi thought of open baffles.
Well, I think finally we found a speaker that GR Research isn't going to be able to fix.
It's kind of hard.
What's that?
Kind of hard when there's no parts.
Yeah. Thank God. Anyway. Well, this is my first experience with open baffle speakers. I know that you've heard them before. Obviously, me, never. And to be honest, I really had no idea what to expect.
Okay.
All I can tell you is I've been reading everyone in our comments say, what you really need to do is try an open baffle speaker for God knows how long. And to the point where I was really like, will you just get a freaking open baffle speaker so they'll be quiet? And honestly, at first I was like, really? Like, is this what everyone's been going on about? I didn't get it. They seemed kind of boring. But once Steve, Mr. Decker, sent us those
the risers,
those wooden blocks that tips them up, my mind did start to change. Honestly, I went back and forth quite a bit. Like, do I like these? Again, they are so different from anything I've ever heard that it was really hard to know if I was just reacting to them being different or if they just weren't for me. And I imagine that this happens to viewers a lot, especially if you've been listening to the same system for years. Lots of, this doesn't sound as good as my amazing X that I've had for 20 years that cost me a nickel energy. And, this experience has really given me an opportunity to empathize a little bit more with what those people might be going through or, what they might be experiencing. And I think if that sounds like you, I think it's important to pump the brakes a little bit.
Okay.
Because in those situations, I think it really does take a minute to start to get used to something this different. And no, I'm not talking about break-in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that still isn't real.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally empathize. I remember the first time that I heard an open baffle speaker, and it was a Magnepan. I think it was Magnepan 3.6 at the time. No, take that back. I lied. It was Martin Logan CLS's. And the first time I ever heard an open baffle speaker, and I was so kind of smitten kitten with them, I bought them. And I was broke at the time. So I cleaned out my student loan account to buy speakers, which I don't recommend. It is something very different. And it either, in my experience, it either ruins you for other speakers that are not open baffle, and you'll kind of forever be an open baffle fan, or you're so entrenched in the box design that things like a little bit of bass reinforcement, port loading and things like that are something you're not willing to do without, because you actually do like that kind of a sound.
Yeah, it really wasn't until you brought the Heresy 4s back out into the room that I really understood just how different the Decware speakers are. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was almost like I'd never heard the Heresies before.
Yeah.
Like ever. And they sounded so different. Like they sounded syrupy to me, warm. Mm-hmm. I would even say probably vintage.
The Heresies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the weirdest thing ever. And the Decware speakers made me feel like I was hearing the Heresies for the first time. But, if you want to know, well, which is better? I mean, honestly, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I like them both. I think the Decware is cool.
Yeah.
It's beautifully made. My only real complaint about their sound is that they just lacked a little bit of that intelligibility that I personally need when watching TV and movies. But that's just me. Just me. Andrew doesn't have the same issue. So I need a little bit of the treble up top to help me not have to, constantly turn to you every 5 minutes and be like, what'd they say?
Yeah.
But that's really it. Other than that, I thought they were a lot of fun. And I've really started to miss them once we had taken them out of our system. It was really then that I think that I really appreciated how unique they are.
Yeah. Yeah. If I can add to that, I'll say that if you try these, or you have tried open baffle speakers and you're going back and forth between open baffle and box speakers, at least for me, this is one of those instances where it's not about break-in, but it's about readjusting, because, when we finished our evaluation of the Decware speakers, we had to go back to a box speaker, and I believe it was the Lintons. And nothing against the Lintons, but you have to let your brain settle into a different kind of sound for a minute, because it is just that kind of different, despite both being speakers, both using drivers, having cones and power, and everything else being exactly the same. The sound is completely different.
Yeah, they're really interesting.
Yeah.
They're very interesting. And, and just if you're wondering, I think that if you do get these speakers, I would get the Zen amp to go with them.
Yeah.
That it was the best pairing.
Yeah. It was absolutely great.
I mean, I guess it's it's probably around the same price as the Audiolab.
Well, it depends what Audiolab you get. If you go with the Audiolab M1, the M1 is a little cheaper. But if you go with the 6000A or A Play, the Zen amp is actually a little bit cheaper. Now, granted, it only has 2 inputs, doesn't have built-in DAC, there's no remote control. So there's going to be some trade-offs. But if you're going for the absolute best sonic pairing, in my opinion, the Zen speakers with the Zen amp and a really nice turntable and photo preamp or music streamer of your choice, you're done.
I don't know. I still think I would probably go with the La Scalas if I had to choose between the two. But I think that has more to do with just their overall scale and how emotionally connected to the music I felt when we had those in the house.
Oh, I would pick La Scalas too. But you're talking about 13 to 16 grand versus like 3.
Totally.
So, yeah, I mean, if money wasn't an object.
Right. I mean,
I'd build a whole room around this
right.
dollar.
I mean, I think that it's okay to disregard price as a reviewer when you're just speaking about your personal preferences.
Right.
I'm not saying that you yourself should disregard price, because you should always consider what's in your budget.
Right.
But this is a show. The end.
Yeah. And I would agree. And it really, for me, I think if you're a fan of high efficiency sound, high efficiency speakers in general, whoever makes them, really, the real barrier to entry on an open baffle of any kind is going to be placement. You can enjoy that high efficiency sound with Klipsch a lot easier than, say, with the Zen series speaker. They are a little bit more forgiving with respect to placement. But if you can get the placement dialed in right on an open baffle, I would totally understand if people pick something like this over Klipsch. Totally get it.
I actually think that these had a little bit more in common with the Bang & Olufsen speakers than just about anything else.
Okay.
And I mean, if you taking away the fact that the Decware speakers don't have any bass really to them, whereas the Beolab 28s do, and they're like, the scale and everything is really big, but there's something about like the clarity and the sound.
The lack of coloration.
The lack of coloration
in resonance.
I do feel that there's some similarities there.
100% agree with you. I would 100% agree with you. And it's purely down to the lack of cabinet resonances, coloration, and things like that. And that's something that B&O gets right. And it's something that when you remove all the hi-fi stuff from a loudspeaker and go with an open baffle directly connected to your amplifier, you're going to experience.
It's just too bad that there are so many people that I think that are so entrenched in the tradition that would not give the Bang & Olufsens even a first look, much less a second look.
Yeah.
Because reasons. But there's a similarity.
There is.
For much less money.
Yeah, and especially in the mid-range, definite similarity. Yeah. Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Well, that is now our review of the Zen Master Series loudspeaker, open baffle loudspeaker from Decware. What did you guys think? Let us know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, my question of the day is very simple. This is where you get to kind of educate me, but it is this. What makes an open baffle speaker special to you? And I anticipate a lot of open baffle fans will give me a ton of reasons, and I really, really want to know. So sound off in the comments below. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe, and go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Kristi left for you down below, it's a great way that you've continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here, and we both thank you guys for doing that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you again for watching. See you on the next video. Bye.